pupil-teacher relationship and a sort of conceptual relationship between the phenomenology of Husserl and the phenomenological existentialism that Heidegger develops. Now, Heidegger himself claims not to be an existentialist, but in a historical rather than a conceptual sense, rather than in a philosophical sense, it's clear that he does influence people like Sartre or Camus. And despite his protestations, his influence has been greatest in the philosophy of existence. As opposed to his unique and somewhat idiomatic philosophical project of developing an ontology. Now, ontology goes back to the Greek term. I mean, maybe you've seen some of the lectures on Plato, and you know that ontology, the science of being, or the logos of being, statements about being, were one of the early philosophical attempts, one of the kind of foundational philosophical enterprises of the Greek tradition. And Heidegger wants to revive that enterprise, which is a particularly intimidating and impressive intellectual ambition, regardless of whether he achieves it or not. To go back to the science of being, to go back to being itself with a capital B, well, I don't know if that's a persuasive or even a possible thing in the 20th century. The fact that Heidegger thinks that he can do that he wants to take that project seriously, is a tribute to his great intellectual ambition, regardless of how it ends up turning out. So he thinks of himself primarily as an ontologist. Now, this leads us to all kinds of difficulties. First of all, talking about being is like trying to bite your teeth. In other words, what can you say about being? How can we come to know being? What sort of procedure do you engage in to find out about being? Well, this maybe discloses his connection to Husserl. You're not going to find out about being by investigating tables individually and chairs individually and Christmas trees individually, or even inspecting the outside world for its regular law-like behavior. The way you're going to find out about being is some process of introspection. This is one of the things that holds the continental tradition together. They tend to be more concerned with that which is inside than they are about that which is outside. There is a decidedly anti-scientistic tendency to this, and I will come back to that problem. But what Heidegger wants to do is find out about being. And he's very familiar with Greek philosophy. As a matter of fact, he thinks that pretty much it's all been downhill since Aristotle. Right, that Christianity, the Romans, the Enlightenment didn't make much of a contribution to the history of thought. After Aristotle, it's all downhill, and the real high point was even before Plato, it was in the pre-Socratics. And what he wants to do is to force us back to the original sophisticated naivete of pre-Socratic thought, which is a very funny way of thinking about it, but he does think that we have actually decreased our understanding of ourselves and the world around us by bracketing or eliminating this problem of ontology, the problem of being, and instead investigating beings, particular elements in the world. So he wants to move away from that practical, concrete, tangible sort of inquiry into something a great deal more abstract and also more nebulous. Now, another thing to think about when we deal with Heidegger and his ontological hopes is what Plato said about being, and it's an interesting thought. Plato says in the Myth of the Cave, when he talks about the divided line, that being is not like the other beings in the world. And when we get up into the realm of the forms, being is like light that discloses the things in the world to us, but it is not one of those things that gets disclosed. So being allows us to know about the being, the small b being of tables and chairs and podiums and carpets and things like that. And we all have a kind of intuitive, everyday knowledge of what it means to say that the grass is green, or the podium is made of wood, or the cup is blue. All those uses of the word is, we kind of feel like we have an idea of what's going on there. But there's a problem. Even though we know these local and particular uses of the word is, we don't know what being is on the whole. We don't know what being capital B is, what it is that holds all these little beings together, the small b beings. And that's because being itself is not like any of the beings that being discloses. Are you following this so far? In other words, light is not like the objects that we see in the room. It's a unique kind of a thing. And here I just mean it metaphorically, because I don't know how to literally talk about this in any kind of sensible way. But the metaphor discloses the idea, roughly speaking, that somehow being is different from all the other stuff of our experience. Heidegger says, before we bother with trivialities like this particular entity or that particular entity, what we have to do is leave all that stuff out, in a way, bracket it for now, and let's talk about what it is to be, how we know being, what being tells us about itself. Now, the question is, how are we going to do this, and what is being? Well, in the first case, Heidegger does not want to have a conception of being which is abstract, formal. He wants to connect it to the experience of everyday life. And this is the kind of the Husserlian turn, or perhaps the whole continental turn. He says, think of it from the perspective of a human being, from your perspective now, rather than constructing a set of abstractions which later on you will use to tailor your experience to the world. Start now with your experience. And remove from your experience the things that are irrelevant, the dross, so that you get the pure gold of ontological knowledge later on. Now, the way in which he does this is to create a theory of what human existence is, and he calls this human existence Dasein, which doesn't translate out of German. One of the things that Heidegger does all the time. Human being. What is it like to be a human being? Dasein is human being in the world. It is finite. It is contingent. It is uncertain. It is a collection of psychic states like worry, guilt, anxiety, and this constellation of human qualities or human entities is not like anything else in the world. It is the way in which, or the vehicle in which, the matrix in which being is disclosed to us. In other words, you can only find out what being is from the perspective or in the way that a human being finds out about what being is, and that's by being a human being. I know how. Now, can you see how this is going to get awfully circular and strange, and that we're going to have whole chapters and perhaps whole volumes of being talks to itself and projects itself into the future of being. You're going to get a lot of what appears to be circular reasoning on account of the fact that we're stuck within the internality, what I call the introcosm, and it's very hard to break out from the introcosm into the exocosm. It's one of the characteristic flaws. It's perhaps the Achilles heel of continental philosophy. So what we're going to do is investigate Dasein, investigate what it is to be a human being. And we're going to do that by being a human being. And we're going to do that in an authentic way. And what that means is that we have to remove our illusions and remove our distraction by the events, the little trivial events in the world. Focus yourself in turn inward, and what you will find is your true self and your true being. You will move from a pre-reflective state of inauthenticity, of concern with beings, small b beings, to an authentic state of concern with being itself.
If a spacecraft were launched from Earth directly to Neptune or Pluto, the journey would take 30 years. But there is an intriguing indirect way of getting to the most remote precincts of the solar system in less than 1/3 that time. Jupiter is the key. Its immense gravity adds momentum to a passing spacecraft, slinging it towards the next planet in a multi-planet tour. The spacecraft virtually steals a bit of energy from Jupiter, which will never be missed. Using this technique, engineers and scientists are planning missions to explore all of the outer planets during the 1970s and 1980s. These missions, each directed toward 3 planets so that all 5 outer planets will be visited, are called Grand Tours. Beginning in 1976 and 1977, Grand Tour spacecraft would fly past Jupiter, Saturn, and on out to Pluto. The complete trip would take about 9 years. Jupiter again is the initial target in 1979. Then on to Uranus and Neptune. By 1988, scientists could be analyzing data gathered at close hand from every major body in the solar system. The dominant feature of the Grand Tour spacecraft is its radio antenna, about 14 feet in diameter. Power is supplied by small nuclear generators that convert heat into electricity. Science instruments are mounted at the opposite end of the spacecraft and on long booms far from the radioactive source. At the Neptune or Pluto phase of a mission, the need for almost total independence from Earth control is essential. The time for radio signals to travel from Neptune to Earth is about 4 hours. Thus, it would take twice that long, 8 hours, for ground controllers to become aware of a spacecraft malfunction and make the necessary correction by radio command.
was a mathematician. And he did two things for me. One is that he told me about his specialty, which was projective geometry. What is it? In geometry, at least the part in which we discussed at that time, we talk about drawings, about figures, a circle, a triangle, in a plane. Now what happened if this plane was transparent with the figures drawn upon it? And the light in illuminating it and projecting it onto another plane behind. What are the properties of geometrical figures? That remain invariant. That is, do not change in that operation. This is projective geometry. The part of geometry which remains valid when you perform a projection. From Professor Klug I got problems which I usually could not solve. I remember one that I liked very much. I could not solve it. I could not prove it. But I tell you what it is. In projective geometry, 4 figures, 4 kinds of figures are declared to be the same. A circle, an ellipse, a parabola, and a hyperbola. If you take any of the 4 in one plane and project it onto another plane, you will not get the same thing, but you will get one of the 4. Projecting a circle can give a parabola. Now here is a theorem in projective geometry. Take one of these 4, the simplest case is circle, and inscribe into it a hexagon. So that the corners, all the 6 corners, lie on the circle. Now the 6 sides of the hexagon, select 3 pairs. Each pair has the opposite 2 lines of the hexagon. Each of these pairs will intersect in one point. Out of the 3 points, you get 3 intersections. Nothing interesting so far. Now comes the theorem. The 3 points so constructed lie on a straight line. True for a circle. And once you have proved it for the circle, you have proved it for the ellipse, for the parabola, for the hyperbola, because that happens to the circle, and straight lines remain straight lines. And the statement of 3 points lying on a straight line is again a statement, invariant, not changing. Under projection. This was a group of new ideas, which I found very interesting.